In the mid-19th century, military confrontations between Ashanti and the Fante contributed to the growth of British influence on the Gold Coast, as the Fante state, concerned about Ashanti activities on the coast, signed a bond of 1844 at Fomena-Adansi that allowed the British to take control of judicial authority from the African courts. The bond of 1844 was a peace agreement signed by Commander Hill on behalf of the British government and the people of southern Ghana. It was signed by 8 Fante chiefs who came from Assin, Denkyira, Abura, Anomabu and Cape Coast. By the late 19th century, the British, through conquest or purchase, occupied most of the forts along the coast. 2 major factors laid the foundations of British rule and the eventual establishment of a colony on the Gold Coast. British reaction to the Ashanti Wars and the resulting instability and disruption of trade, and Britain's increasing preoccupation with the suppression and elimination of the slave trade. During most of the 19th century, Ashanti, the most powerful state of the Akan interior, sought to expand its rule and to promote and protect its trade. The first Ashanti invasion of the coastal regions took place in 1807. The Ashanti moved south again in the Fante War of 1811, and in the Asante-Akim-Ekwiapem War of 1814 to 1816. These invasions, though not decisive, disrupted trade in such products as feathers, ivory, rubber and oil palm, and threatened the security of the European forts. Local British, Dutch and Danish authorities were all forced to come to terms with the Ashanti. In 1817, the African Company of Merchants signed a treaty of friendship that recognized Ashanti claims to sovereignty over large areas of the coast and its peoples. The assets of the African Company of Merchants consisted primarily of 9 trading posts or factories. They were namely Fort William, Fort James, Fort Sekendi, Fort Winneba, Fort Apollonia, Fort Tentunkeri, Fort Metal Cross, Fort Commander and Cape Coast Castle, the last of which was the administrative center. The coastal people, primarily some of the Fantes and the inhabitants of the new town of Accra, who were chiefly Ga, came to rely on British protection against Ashanti incursions, but the merchant companies had limited ability to provide such security. The British Crown dissolved the company in 1821, giving authority over British forts on the Gold Coast to Charles McCarthy, governor of the colony of Sierra Leone. The British forts in Sierra Leone remained under common administration for the first half of the century. McCarthy's mandate was to impose peace and to end the slave trade. He sought to do this by encouraging the coastal peoples to oppose Kumasi rule and by closing the great routes to the coast. Incident and sporadic warfare continued, however. In 1824, McCarthy was killed and most of his forces was wiped out in a battle with the Ashanti forces. The British were able to defeat an Ashanti invasion of the coast in 1826 with a combined force of British and local forces, including the Fante and the people of Accra. When the British government allowed control of the Gold Coast settlement to revert to British African Company of Merchants in the late 1820s, relations with Ashanti were still problematic. From the Ashanti point of view, the British had failed to control the activities of their local coastal allies. Had this been done, Ashanti might not have found it necessary to attempt to impose peace on the coastal peoples. McCarthy's encouragement of coastal opposition to Ashanti and the subsequent 1824 British military attack further indicated to Ashanti leaders that the Europeans, especially the British, did not respect the Ashantis. Military confrontations between Ashanti and the Fante contributed to the growth of British influence on the Gold Coast, as the Fante state, concerned about Ashanti activities on the coast, signed the bond of 1844 at Fomena-Adansi that allowed the British to take over the authority from African courts. The agreement bound the coastal rulers to protect the rights of individuals and of property, to abolish such regressive customs such as human sacrifice, and to authorize British judges to help them try crimes such as murder and robbery, so that the customs of the country will become molded to the general principles of the British. For nearly 3 centuries, European interests on the coast of West Africa were mainly commercial. The British, who had been on the shores of Ghana from as early as 1555, devoted their first 175 years to the building of their trading stations and trading activities which included the trading of slaves with the locals. This resulted in the rise of two formidable indigenous states, the Fantes, who were along the coast, and the Ashantis in the adjacent forest. The united Fantes had control of the trade routes to the sea. Trading activities along these routes were on their terms. The Ashantis secured control over the supply of gold and slaves to the coastal markets. The distribution of European imports they receive in exchange was also managed by the Ashantis. As the Ashanti kingdom grew in wealth and influence, they sought to eliminate the middlemen from the supply chain, who were the Fantes. This led to a long period of conflict between the two ethnic groups. In 1755, the king of Ashantis, who was at the time Osei-Bonsu, began preparing for war with the Fantes. However, he died before preparations could be completed. A 20-year succession dispute ensued. Eventually, Osei Kojo became the leader of the Ashantis and carried out a series of attacks against the Fantes. By early 1806, the main Fante army had been met and utterly subdued by the Ashantis. The Ashantis would then eventually have authority over some Fante states. Political instability in the Gold Coast caused the British to abolish the slave trade in 1807. This was met with unfavorable response from the Ashantis because this trade was the major reason for waging war against the Fantes at the time. It caused significant tension in Anglo-Ashanti relations. All attempts at peace were unsuccessful. A major consequence was that the Ashanti ordered Ashanti traders not to visit the fort in Cape Coast belonging to the British, but to only deal with the Dutch and the Danes. This made the British increasingly more concerned about Ashanti attacks on their coastal traders, as well as on the coastal ethnic groups. A select committee of the British recommended that measures needed to be put in place to ensure the safety of their people, and a new governor had to be appointed by the British Crown. It was also decided that a form of government over Cape Coast Fort should also be instituted. The Gold Coast settlement was soon placed under Governor of Sierra Leone, Sir Charles McCarthy, by 1821. He arrived on the shores of Gold Coast by 1822. McCarthy inherited a strong likelihood of war with the Ashantis, but mistook it to be a local quarrel which could have no effect on the British at the time. He initiated policies unfavorable to the Ashantis, which included forcing them to release the Fantes they had as hostage. Predictably, the Ashantis later sought revenge. Ashanti armies marched southward early in 1824, and on the 21st of January, they met and defeated a small force under Sir Charles McCarthy himself at Katamansu. Sir Charles McCarthy was killed in action, with his skull used as a trophy of war. After this incident, the British decided to protect their forts and traders and leave the locals to their own devices, while the Ashantis continued to wage war on the Fantes. Under Lieutenant Colonel Perdin, the British won a decisive victory against the Ashantis at Katamansu on August 7, 1826. This battle will be named the Battle of Katamansu. After this, the British tried to bring peace between the Ashantis and the Fantes, but the coalition of coastal chiefs were unwilling to negotiate. The British merchant then formed an association or body to protect themselves and their interests. This led to a committee sending out Governor George McLean in 1830. By February 15, George McLean assumed the duties of the President of the Council of Merchants at Cape Coast. His major task was to ensure peace between the British and the Ashantis, as well as the Fantes and the Ashantis. He was able to build a cordial relationship with both parties and ultimately succeeded in bringing peace between all parties by 1831. This led to the expansion of trade and British influence. Peace with the Ashantis also coincided with the work of missionaries at the time, which caused the building of schools, especially along the coastal areas. On the political front, the British government seized the opportunity to sign a political arrangement that extended British protection to the signatory confederation of the Fantes in 1844. This would be known as the Bond of 1844. Many divisions of Achin Kutuku, the Wassa, and the Aguna had also signed the bond by 1849. The number of states adhering to the bond in the coastal states increased by 1850. The kings of the Fante states who signed the bond of 1844 were Kwadwo Tibu, king of Denkyira; Kwesi Otu, chief of Abura; Chibu Kuma, chief of Assin; second chief of Assin called Jebi; Kwesi Ankra, chief of Donade; Ewusi, chief of Dominase; Amonu, chief of Anomabu; and Joe Agri, chief of Cape Coast. It is believed that the Bond of 1844 was the official move which paved way for colonial rule over the southern lands of Ghana until a later date when the Ashanti state and the hinterlands were eventually brought under British rule. In my next video, I'll be discussing the Battle of Nsamanko of January 1824 and the Battle of Katamansu in 1826. The Katamansu War, also known as the Battle of Dodua, was a war that defeated and prevented the Ashantis from dominating the coast in 1824. Allied forces fought gallantly and overcame the Ashanti army with a devastating victory which paralyzed the Ashanti army and was a factor in the loss of its former glory. This contributed to the British power and prestige rise on the coast and the hinterlands of Ghana. If you like my videos, do subscribe and share, as I'll be coming your way with more discussions and presentations in the coming days. See you all next time.